Today we're jumping back to our NHL offseason plan series and looking at the New York Rangers. They were the 7th ranked team for the NHL's regular season, and of course they were the last team eliminated from the Stanley Cup Playoffs ahead of the Stanley Cup Final between the Avs and the Lightning. What steps will the Rangers take this offseason to prepare for next year? We'll discuss that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, today we're jumping back into our NHL offseason plan series and looking at the New York Rangers. Of course, the Rangers were one of the regular season's top teams, 7th overall in the regular season. Of course, made it to the Final Four, and were just recently eliminated here by the Tampa Bay Lightning in the Eastern Conference Final. Now, we still have a few other teams that ranked a little bit higher during the regular season that we haven't completed yet, but since the Rangers are now out, I wanted to step back and get these teams done in as close to the order as we can based on the NHL regular season standing. So if you're new to this series, first up, what we're going to do is recap the 21-22 season. We're going to take a look at their salary cap situation. We're going to take a look at any expiring contracts they have to deal with this offseason, and then we're going to address the top burning questions facing this franchise as they prepare for next season. So let's first up recap the 21-22 season. So the Rangers finished with a record of 52-24-6 for 110 points, getting themselves into the top 3 of a very tough Metropolitan Division. Of course, we know that they've went all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals after eliminating the Pittsburgh Penguins in round 1 in a very tough series, eliminating the Carolina Hurricanes in round 2 in a really long, tough series there as well. Back-to-back 7-gamers, and then, of course, they lose in 6 to the Tampa Bay Lightning in the Eastern Conference Final. So they've certainly taken some huge steps this year. I think a lot of people probably wouldn't have predicted that they would have gone this far this early after coming out of this rebuild and kind of going back into more of a competitive mode. I think a lot of people like myself did expect some big gains and jumps from the Rangers this year, but I don't know that many people would have predicted that they would have taken it this far. So that's a great story for them this early on with all these players they have that are young and big part of the future. Now let's look at some team stats where they finished with 250 goals scored, 17th best in the league, so that could stand to be a little bit better. Goals against, on the other hand, was near the top of the league, number 2, 204 goals against, largely part due to their strong goaltending, and the S-team defense certainly plays a role there too, but Igor Shesterkin certainly had an outstanding season, had a big part of that. The power play was excellent, 25.2% for 4th best in the NHL, and the PK was very reliable and trustworthy as well, 7th best in the NHL, 82.3%. So when you have both your special teams results, your PP and your PK, both in the top 10, you know good things are likely going to happen. And when you have a goaltender like Shesterkin and your team not allowing much in the net for goals against, then you know you have a chance to win every night, and that's a big part of that for sure. Certainly the area here that sticks out is goals for. The power play was good, which tells you that 5-on-5, which certainly was fair to say was their Achilles heel here as they went further into the playoffs, needs to get better going into next year. Lots of personal milestones as well. We saw Artemi Panarin put up a 96-point season. Chris Kreider with a career-high 52 goals. Of course, Igor Shesterkin, as I mentioned, likely the Vezina Trophy winner. As I record this, that has not yet been confirmed or announced, but it's widely expected that Igor will take home the hardware. He had a 2.07 goals against average and a .935 save percentage throughout the regular season, and he continued to play just as strong throughout the playoffs. Had a few games here and there weren't quite as good, but he was a big part of this team's success. No doubt, I think fair to say this team's MVP. And that's saying something. When you have a 52-goal scorer and almost a 100-point producer, not to mention guys like Fox, Zibanejad, etc., and you really look to Igor, it really shows you how special of a year this guy had for them. And like I said, a lot of these guys, for the most part, with a couple of exceptions, are pretty young. So this goes to show you that the future is really bright in the Rangers organization. Now let's take a look at their salary cap situation going into the offseason to prepare for next season. So as of right now, according to CapFriendly.com, the Rangers have 14 contracts on the books for next year, totaling just over $69 million. Now within that $69 million is also included is some dead space. So the 14 contracts actually add up to slightly less than that, they have some buyouts that they're still paying for Kevin Shattenkirk, Dan Girardi, and Tony DeAngelo. So that totals $3.4 million in dead salary cap space. So that leaves them with a total available of $13.45 million. Now, of course, we do know that they just recently signed in the last couple of days here Vitaly Kravtsov, which is a one-way contract. So he is expected to be on NHL roster or will require waivers next year. But for right now, Cap Friendly doesn't have him showing on their NHL roster. So this number could actually be slightly different, although his contract's less than $1 million. It was 1 year at $875, so I don't, not a big impact, but an impact nonetheless. Now let's jump over to take a look at their expiring contracts. Who are their RFAs and UFAs? They have a lot of players that are on expiring deals that decisions need to be made, and it's not going to be easy for Chris Drury and his staff. Now, looking at the RFAs, we're led by the former number 2 overall pick from a few years back, Kaapo Kakko. Of course, Kakko, the big story around him was the Game 6 scratch in the Eastern Conference Final against the Lightning. We'll discuss that a little bit further in the next segment, but he does need a new contract. We also have Julian Gauthier, Sammy Blais, Alexander Georgiev, and defenseman Libor Hajek. Now, I would suspect that Sammy Blais will definitely get re-upped here. I don't know about Gauthier, Georgiev, and Hajek. I think they all will likely get contracts of some degree. I'm just not sure they're all going to be New York Rangers. So we could see a case where they're either not given a qualifying offer, thus making them a UFA. They could be traded, or they could end up getting a different kind of contract. In the case of Gauthier, maybe he signs a two-way deal. That's probably the best they would offer him. And Georgiev, I don't see him being a Ranger next year. So I would think they would try to facilitate a trade ahead of the time that they have to give the qualifying offer. And if it's not possible, then maybe he becomes a UFA, doesn't get a qualifying offer. Hajek, on the other hand, I think likely would be qualified. Not sure where his role is next year. I would suspect Kakko and Blais go through a little bit more of a standard procedure where they're given a QO and eventually come to terms here on a shorter term bridge contract. Now, on the UFA side, they have some really tough decisions as well. Of course, we got Ryan Strome, been the number 2 center here for a while in New York, and has done a pretty good job for the most part, but certainly not clear what his future holds. You get Andrew Kopp, who could be a number 2 center, who's pretty much a utility knife kind of player. You can put him on either wing, down the middle, very productive. They gave up a lot to get him, so I do wonder how hard they're going to try to retain his services. You get Tyler Mott, who was also a deadline acquisition, Kevin Rooney, Greg McKegg, Frankie Vetrano. Of course, Vetrano was another really good deadline pickup, and the defenseman Justin Braun as well, who's also in that category as a defenseman for depth purposes. If you look at these UFAs, to be completely honest, I think Braun is most likely not coming back. I do think when it comes to the rest, though, there's question marks. It's really difficult to say who they keep and who they don't keep. It's going to be hard to decide, but we'll discuss that coming up in the next segment here. But also to keep in mind, as I mentioned earlier, Vitaly Kravtsov would have been listed on the RFAs, but was just re-signed to a 1-year, one-way deal. So we'll see what the future holds for him as well. Now, what are the top burning questions and the top priorities facing the New York Rangers this offseason? Well, to me, your top question by far is what do you do with your UFAs and your deadline acquisitions? Because they had some really good players. I must say, Chris Drury did an excellent job at the deadline. They gave up a decent amount of assets for those acquisitions, but they all fit in nicely. They all contributed well, and they went far in the playoffs. They didn't win the cup, but they came, to the Final Four and to Game 6. Like, that's still a really good result. So, they picked up Andrew Kopp. They picked up Tyler Mott. They picked up Vetrano. They picked up Braun. Like I said, Braun I don't see coming back. They already have a solid-looking group of top 6 defensemen for next year with a couple of more young defensemen waiting in the wings. I don't see that really being necessary to bring him back. All the rest, though, they do have question marks. I think there would be interest, at least, to bring them all back. And then you get Ryan Strome. To me, the Ryan Strome scenario is the biggest question mark. To be completely honest, this is just my gut feeling. My gut feeling says Strome does not return. I think Strome ends up getting a better offer somewhere else and departing via free agency. I'm not sure that I don't think they're totally against signing him, but he's certainly played well. I guess you have to debate what the future holds. There's some that think that Andrew Kopp essentially was picked up at the deadline and they gave up as much as they did because of the confidence that they could re-sign him and that he could become the number 2 center. Now, there's also some that feel that there's a good chance we might see the kid line be all in top 6 roles next year, like Hedel, Lafreniere, and Kakko. Now, at the end of the season, we heard comments from head coach Gerard Gallant saying that he would be surprised if guys like Lafreniere and Kakko didn't secure regular top 6 spots next year. They've been kind of waiting on Filip Hedel with the hopes he would become the number 2 center over time. But of course, his development's taken longer than some hoped or anticipated. But he showed a lot of flashes in the playoffs and even throughout the regular season that maybe they're confident that he's ready for that. So clearly, if they don't bring back Strome or Kopp, that saves them a ton of money. But is it going to be best production-wise? Now, I know I was listening to a lot of different people's opinions on this. Like I said, a lot of people are convinced that Kopp will return because they gave up such a big price tag to get him that it doesn't, it would make more sense if they try. And to me, that does make a lot of sense. He's probably looking at the 5 to 5.5 range. Strome might be looking for similar money, but I guess depends on how you feel about each player. Strome might be looking for more money. I really don't know. To be honest, I wouldn't pay more than that for Ryan Strome, regardless, and I wouldn't go too long-term either. So it's debatable, right? But then you got Hedel, Lafreniere, and Kakko that are all certainly showing glimpses here. I know that a lot of people were upset that the kid line didn't stay together even more during the playoffs and get more of a chance during the Game 6 with Kakko being scratched. And is that a factor as well? We know that Kakko said that nobody talked to him ahead of time, that he just saw the lineup. That doesn't go well. To me, a guy like that, you talk to him and let him know what your decision is. Explain yourself. And Gallant, as like I said, he's pushed all the right buttons as a head coach this year for the most part. He's known as being a very much a player's coach. I think the team really likes him, generally speaking. So I'm surprises me. That's really about the only thing that, at least from my perspective, that we've really seen a lot of criticism over. But you got to wonder, relationships do play a big role in things too. And if anything, hopefully Kakko will just be more motivated to get even better for next year. But that's the question. My gut feeling, though, says that Strome doesn't return. I think there's a good chance that they do bring back Andrew Kopp. Andrew Kopp is a utility player because now if you want to make the kid line your like a top 6 role, like your second line, then that leaves you with like Zibanejad, Kreider, and are you going to put Panarin on the other, like on their line, or what are you going to do? Or are you going to put Kopp with Panarin? To me, honestly, I think it makes more sense if you could bring back Andrew Kopp and have him play with Panarin. You get Kreider and Zibanejad, and then you can either go with the kid line at times, or you can move Lafreniere and Kakko onto the wings in the top 6. Lafreniere himself even said he didn't care what side he played on, and he'd play right wing if he had to get into the top 6. He committed to working on his skating. Said all the right things. So there's a lot to be decided there, and I'm not really sure what direction they're going to go. Frankie Vetrano, on the other hand, I think there's a chance that they'll want to keep him because he did so well. But because of that, I think they're not going to want to overpay there. And I think there's a chance he might not be back just because of, other teams I'm sure took notice of what he did. Tyler Mott, maybe he signs a cheaper contract to be a part of the team's 4th line. He'd be a great fit there if he could. Because also, you got to remember, they also have Sammy Blais, who they were hoping to be a top 6 guy too and got hurt so early in the season. So what do you do with him, right? Because he should be ready to roll now for next year. It's tough to decide what do you do. So I want to hear some comments. Is Strome and Kopp both gone, or is one of them back? If so, who? To me, like I said, I think Kopp has a good chance to come back. They have $13 million in cap space. They signed Kopp to say 5.5. They also need a backup goalie. That's another big question facing this team. Georgiev has been asking for an opportunity to play a bigger role and get more starts and to move on to another team if that has to happen. And it's going to have to with Igor being so good. So to me, Georgiev's not back. So you need to find another goalie who can come in and give you probably a good 25 games or so next year. That role could be a veteran guy in a cheaper contract. It doesn't really have to be anything too crazy, just as long as you're confident they can give you a solid 20-25 starts. But they do need to go shopping for a backup goaltender. That is also very high on the priority list here as well. And then there's also been some talk, are they going to go for like what they call a missing ingredient? Because clearly this team, like I said, throughout the year, and it became more apparent in the playoffs, The 5-on-5 offense is what held this team back from doing even greater things. And if they want to get over the hump and have a chance to get through teams like Tampa deep in the playoffs and win the Stanley Cup, that has to get better. So clearly, if they can get more offense out of their kids, that would be a big step. And it's going to be challenging for guys like Mika and Kreider and Panarin. They should be able to come close to reproducing what they did this year again next year. But as time goes on, it does get more and more challenging to do that. So clearly, they need more of a balanced lineup. And that's pretty clear in that regard. So, you have to wonder, are they going to be going for any kind of a trade to add a player with killer instinct or, a grit kind of player? There was a lot of talk that they were very interested in JT Miller ahead of the deadline, but didn't pull the trigger. They went the other route instead. So to me, if they bring back Andrew Kopp, I don't see them then on top of that going for a guy like Miller. Miller, of course, played there before. They're familiar with him. I think he'd be a good fit there, but to me, you don't bring back Kopp and then trade for Miller. It's going to get complicated cap-wise and things like that. So they have to also not only have to think about the current year and what's coming up. They got $13 million, but then you're going to have some other guys that are going to need new contracts that will kick in the year after, like Lafreniere, like K'Andre Miller, things like that. So you have to leave some space there. They have a lot of money tied up. They know they have Zibanejad, Kreider, Panarin, all long-term in the forward group. You've got Fox locked up on the back end long-term. So, clearly, you've got a lot of money tied up with what you do have signed. So you have to figure out a way to keep some of these other players in the mix here. So we'll see. I mean, obviously, like I said, that Kakko scratcher, some people are convinced that maybe Kakko could become an offer sheet target by other teams. Maybe he could be traded. And I wouldn't completely rule that out. I guess, would we see a huge deal in New York where they consider trading a guy like Kakko and, Kravtsov or any other pieces to bring in another veteran player who can put them over the top to really compete for a cup next year? I guess I wouldn't completely rule that out, but I'm not so sure we're going to see that. Like I said, I think it's more likely that they try to grow these kids, like Lafreniere, Kakko, Hedl, maybe bring back Andrew Kopp, maybe bring back Tyler Mott in the bottom six role and continue to go here. They got to find a backup goalie. I don't think it's going to be as wild and crazy as some think it might, but they do have a lot of growth to do. And the main thing is they got to figure out how to grow their 5-on-5 offense. That's by far the team's biggest weakness. To me, I'd also really strongly suggest naming a captain for next year. I really think that that's something that they need to do. You haven't seen a team really win a Stanley Cup without a captain. I think that's an important thing. Were they held off naming a captain this year? I kind of wondered if they were maybe waiting to give it to Adam Fox because of the fact that he was still on the youngest side. But I wonder if now, after seeing him play more this year and then through the playoffs, I really think a guy like Chris Kreider really deserves to have that C in his jersey. Fox could be a future captain maybe down the road, but to me, Kreider is the most logical candidate in my mind to be that guy, but I think they should name a captain before opening night of the upcoming 22-23 season. I think that'll play a role as well. And you got to wonder, another thing to put all this here is the signing of Vitaly Kravtsov. And according to NHL insiders, he wasn't necessarily signed with the intent of trading him. Because, some players have more value with a contract than without. But he's signed to a 1-year, one-way deal, and it sounds like the more likely scenario is that they keep him and play him, and he's not going to probably be happy if he's not playing in a top 6, top 9 role. But, of course, the coach can only put him wherever he's, earning his spot, so to speak. So difficult to say where it goes, but they do have a bit of a logjam of players without even bringing back the UFAs. So it's difficult to say where things go. I think we're going to definitely have to see some movement, but how it all shakes out, it's kind of tricky to see. But they have a really bright future. It's only going to continue getting better as these players that are young and getting all this experience early will help them teach them not only what they got to do themselves, but what it takes to win in the playoffs. And as we see them grow, they should be an Eastern Conference contender and a Cup contender theoretically for a long time. So let me know your thoughts on the Rangers offseason. All kinds of questions. It's hard to say what the answers are, but I'd love to know what your thoughts are and how they'll proceed down in the comments. If you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.